Just imagine universe of Stan Lee, Superman Origins. Siegel and Joe Shuster changed the landscape of entertainment when they created Superman. The world's first proper superhero has had his story told multiple times over and by some of the greatest writers in comic book history, but his origins have often remained the same. He's an alien, the last son of Krypton, who was sent to Earth moments before his planet's destruction. His ship landed in Kansas, where a farming couple, Jonathon and Martha Kent, adopted him, raised him the American way, which has since been toned down in terms of reference, of course, and taught him how to use his powers in service of good. As Superman, Kal-El becomes a shining beacon of hope for humanity, in the main continuity anyway. There are many retellings of the story of the Man of Steel, Mark Millar's communist makeover from Superman, Red Son, DeMatteis having the Waynes adopted Kal-El over the Kents, and comedy legend John Cleese's infamous Superman shrew Brit immediately stand out as amongst the most memorable reimaginings of Superman over the decades to us. But, of course, you're not here to listen to those stories. The title of this video promised you a Stan Lee version of Superman, and that is exactly what we're going to give you. In 2001, the architect of Marvel Comics crossed the lines to this distinguished competition and wrote a year-long miniseries that retold the series of the Justice League from his perspective, and one of the most intriguing members of Stan Lee's Justice League is Superman, though his backstory is unlike anything you can imagine. We argue that that is for the better. So, without further ado, here are the origins of Superman from Stan Lee's Just Imagine Universe explored. But before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means quite a lot. Thank you. Now, let's begin. It begins with Premonitions of Doom, the origins of Stan Lee's Superman. Just imagine Stan Lee with John Buscema creating. Something is a sentence most comic book fans must be familiar with by now. After all, Buscema is one of the top artists during Marvel Comics' boom period in the 60s and was directly involved in the creative process of making the Silver Surfer alongside Stan, the Man. Most of everything that Marvel put out during the 60s and 70s will have Buscema's artistic fingerprints all over them, including the Avengers, Thor, the Fantastic Four, and nearly 200 issues of Conan the Barbarian. So to say the pair is sort of a dream team would be an understatement, and their version of Superman 2 is perhaps the best character to come out of the entire Just Imagine series. With that said, let's dive into his history a little bit. When you see the first page of Just Imagine Stan Lee with John Buscema creating Superman, you will feel like you're watching David Lynch's Dune, specifically the now iconic introductory monologue by Princess Irulan. Except only in this case, the woman in question is not a princess. She's an ordinary Kryptonian woman whose name is Layla, who has eyes for but one man. That man, Squadman SALDEN, a member of the Kryptonian police squad, and a dedicated one at that. His hard-ass attitude is rivaled only by Guy Gardner's in the DC multiverse, and that itself is saying something. SALDEN is a man who is completely dedicated to serving his squad. We don't hear much about his parents or his past life, besides the fact that he has but one ambition: become the mightiest member of a squadron that includes genetically enhanced officers as well. SALDEN has clearly spent some time on the force and has even put away some of the worst terrorists in Kryptonian history, including Gundor, who is currently serving a life sentence thanks to SALDEN's bravery. The Squadman is seen working out vigorously as Layla muses about the creation of Space-Time Bender, a machine that would allegedly allow their people to travel to the furthest reaches of the universe in the blink of an eye, thanks to a mysterious green element that serves as its power source. Any guesses as to what that element might be? Now you might be wondering, why on earth are Kryptonians actively using kryptonite in Stan Lee's version of the Justice League? But as you might have noticed, this is an entirely different Krypton we're talking about. It isn't on the brink of destruction. In fact, thanks to the discovery of kryptonite, the planet might be on the brink of an evolutionary leap. Layla marvels about this very fact, but she is also filled with a sense of impending doom. She beckons her beloved to leave his weights and spend some time with her, but he reminds her of his goals. SALDEN tells Layla that she is the love of his life. Rather, she is life itself to him, but he cannot stand the fact that a bunch of genetically altered soldiers are supposed to be the new line of defense for his ancient planet, and he wants his own might to be as strong as his love for Layla. As you can see, SALDEN is a typical jock, what with his blonde hair and need-to-win attitude, but his love for Layla is as real as it gets, which is why it is even more tragic that she's right when she thinks to herself that she will never see him again. SALDEN takes off to join his squad for active duty. SALDEN arrives on the scene, but at what cost? The small guy saves the day to his deepest regret. Stan Lee has always been big on keeping stories as natural as is possible, which might seem like a bold claim coming from the co-creator of the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but for some reason his style of working lends an uncanny sense of realism to this version of Krypton. And we mean that in the best way possible. See, normally when we'd say Superman took off to save the day, we'd be referring to the fact that he would literally fly in to save the day. But on Stan Lee's Krypton, native Kryptonians seem to have none of the superpowers that have made them iconic to comic book readers over the years. They can't even shoot laser beams from their eyes and don't have X-ray vision. They can't even fly. They're pretty much like regular human beings, save for two key differences, one of which we'll address later on. But the other is their hyper-advanced technological systems. Stan Lee's Krypton is a futuristic planet with technology that far outclasses that of Earth. Earlier when we said SALDEN took off, we did mean it literally, but his power of flight is thanks to a device called a shoulder harness, which seems to be a very common thing on this planet. SALDEN is impressed with the new version that his department has issued to him. It makes nary a sound, and the squad man takes a moment to marvel at the wondrous things science can achieve himself. Then he arrives at the station at hand and quickly realizes the gravity of it. A group of terrorists had hijacked a vessel, and his squad was basically pinned down in the middle of a hostile gunfight that had put the hostages in jeopardy as well. They began ordering him to stay behind, basically because he wasn't enhanced like them, but a stun bomb rocks them all into submission and sets the stage for SALDEN to show off his stuff. And show off he does, basically turning into Kryptonian John Wick, misdirecting terrorists by throwing their grenades at them, sneaking into the vessel through a duct just small enough for him, then proceeding to come out on top in a 1-against-5 scenario, where the latter were armed with guns. His heroics are broadcasted all across Krypton thanks to their holographic news system, and his captain thanks him for his brave service once again. SALDEN takes his leave and heads home to his beloved Layla, unaware that he would never talk to her again. We leave the squad HQ to enter a max security prison yard where Gundor Gurok is administering the beating of a lifetime to a former crew member who snitched on him. The facility's guards try to stop the terrorists from killing his fellow man, but that was their biggest mistake. Gurok wanted the squad men to get involved so he could steal one of their shoulder harnesses and get his revenge on the man who put him in that hellhole in the first place. He makes his way to SALDEN's home, but finds Layla instead, and with a short window to escape from his enemy's home, he decides to turn his wife into an example, killing her in cold blood and leaving behind a note for SALDEN that simply said, "Something to remember me by." When the squad man arrived home and discovered the horrifying scene that awaited him, he broke down in guilt and grief, because if he hadn't put Gurok behind bars, perhaps Layla would have been alive today. He blames himself for her death, and thinks to himself that he's lost the one thing that meant the most to him in this world. And so, he vows to kill Gurok in retribution, setting him down a path that would change his life forever, and not in the way even he would have expected. Retribution. A chase gone wrong and a whole new world. SALDEN arrives on Earth. So, understandably, after losing his last real relationship besides the one that he has with his duty, SALDEN goes into a blood rage, threatening to beat up his own squad members if they didn't reveal Gurok's location to him. He also goes so far as to skip arming for the mission to capture the infamous fugitive, preferring to dispense punishment in the old school style with his bare fists. They catch up with him at the worst place possible, the site of the space-time bender. Turns out the criminal had put 2 and 2 together and figured that his best chance for survival was in a galaxy far, far away. Presently, he was in the process of hijacking the said chance for himself, which conveniently seats 2. We wonder why. Oh, no time to think about things, because here comes Squadman SALDEN with bad intentions on his mind. Gurok, looking to finish the job while he's at his escape, opens the doors to the space-time bender and allows SALDEN to enter the vessel. As soon as he does, Gundor Gurok hits the jump button that warps them both to an oxygen-based planet. The two eternal enemies are locked in battle all the while, with Gurok having the upper hand for the most of it. They arrive upon a blue-green planet in the Sol system, and Gundor Gurok thinks his victory is complete when he manages to escape the crashing space-time bender thanks to his shoulder harness. SALDEN prepares himself for imminent death because the vessel was currently hurtling towards the surface of this alien planet, and he was trapped inside with no way out. Even though the vessel landed in the ocean, which cushioned the landing and saved SALDEN from certain death, it wouldn't be long before he died anyway, or so he thought to himself. SALDEN curses his luck, saying, "What a way to end up, running out of air miles below the surface of a strange planet in an unknown galaxy." And to be honest with you, we get where he's coming from. He knows that once he opens the gate to his vessel, it's game over for him. The sheer pressure of the ocean will crush him to death, and if that doesn't do it, then he'll be one of the planet's predatory life forms. But to his great astonishment, neither happens. The water pressure doesn't budge his vessel as greatly as he thought it would, and then the vessel tries to get to the surface, and he shoots up like a torpedo. After breaking the surface, he notices that a green iridescence has covered his ship's crash site, no doubt contamination from that rare Kryptonian element, but right now he's got bigger fish to fry. And we mean that semi-literally, because SALDEN outswims sharks to get to the banks of a beach, where he lies down exhausted and filled with thoughts of Layla and revenge. Two Kryptonians on planet Earth, SALDEN and GUNDOR'S fates collide. While both Gundor Gorak and Squadman SALDEN were of Kryptonian origin, their trajectories on planet Earth couldn't have unfolded more differently if they'd tried. Gundor used his shoulder harness to land on a tribal island and quickly began acting upon his plan to rule the world. He convinced the islanders that he was a god, because he fell from the sky, and after whooping their best warriors, he takes his rightful throne, being attended to by the entire tribe for his every whim. SALDEN has a decidedly harder time on Earth. For starters, he gets ambushed by some thugs who are looking to rob him clean. He then finds out that Earth's technology is light years behind where it needs to be for the creation of a space-time bender. And to top it all off, Gundor Gorak lives while his beloved Layla lies murdered. He thinks to himself that he must return home, if it is just to honor her memory, but things aren't so bad for him either. SALDEN realizes that the reason why he is able to perform the seemingly godlike feats that he is because Earth's gravitational pull is about 100 times lesser than Krypton's, which is a homage to the original explanation for Superman's powers given by Jerry Siegel, and fans of Dragon Ball Z know exactly how that affects your power levels. So now that he was on planet Earth that was literally lighter than his, everything he did was amplified at least 100 times. He could leap over buildings, break bones with ease, and see accurately across great distances thanks to some kind of telescopic vision. With these superpowers, SALDEN is able to immediately grasp English and makes his way to a circus, reasoning that he will need money to survive on an alien world like this. Somehow, Stan Lee's protagonists always choose the most eccentric ways to earn cash, and SALDEN is no exception. With a performance that would put the Flying Graysons to shame, SALDEN wows the circus audience for half an hour and gets out of the place with enough money to rent out a shady apartment and buy a computer and TV in an effort to learn about Earth's space program, but his research leaves him disheartened. SALDEN finds out that this crummy little planet has barely reached the preliminary stages of space travel and deduces that it's all the intraplanetary conflict that has led to all of this. War and terrorism has withheld Earth from reaching its potential as a star-spanning race, and SALDEN feels like he was fated to arrive on this planet to save it from itself. But he is also aware of the fact that they might not take kindly to aliens, given how primitive their society was. When the circus master asked him how he performed his outrageous trapeze act, he simply replied that he used a gizmo to do it. And later on, after resolving to help end war on Earth in an effort to accelerate their space program, he realizes that he needs to come up with a story for his powers, to which he comes up with after reading an issue of Furious Comics that a previous tenant had left behind. And so the story was set. SALDEN would claim that all of his power came from his shoulder harness, which he would claim as a patented invention of his. Even if anyone came across it, there wouldn't be any trouble, because the space-time bender crash broke its fuel cells and it was practically useless now. He would keep his true identity as an alien hidden from all, for reasons we'd already mentioned above, and for the purpose of blending into human society, he would go by the name he randomly came up with when the circus master asked for one, Clark Kent. Fun fact, Clark Kent is the only superhero name in Stan Lee's Just Imagine universe that remains unchanged because it's already alliterative. As SALDEN broods over his future plans for returning to Krypton, we see that his adversary has grown tired of ruling over tribals and has decided to take over an honest-to-God city, which has landed him squarely on the doorstep of the Church of Eternal Empowerment, situated in a beautiful sunny Los Angeles. An elderly couple beckons him inside, telling him that their reverend has been waiting for him. Gorak is clearly disturbed by this, as no one should know he was even here, but after meeting with this Reverend Derek, he decides throwing in with the guy would allow him to achieve his goals faster. In another part of town, the newly christened Clark Kent gets a visit from a face that is all too familiar to us Superman fans. Meeting Lois Lane, defeating Gorak, and saving the Chinese president. How SALDEN became Superman. As SALDEN ponders over how he can navigate the vastness of planet Earth and locate Gorak for their final confrontation, an answer presents itself to him on a silver platter, or shall we say, herself. Because the Kryptonian's thoughts are interrupted by a talented agent who is rather impressed with his circus act and wants him to sign to a contract. Drum rolls for her name revealed, please. It's Lois Lane, the only other proper alliterative name for a character that found its way into Stan Lee's reimagining of the DC Universe. Lois Lane pitches a publicity gimmick to Clark Kent. She wants to call him Superman and is convinced that his incredible feats of strength can get them TV deals, merch rights, and money out the wazoo. While SALDEN is initially apprehensive of the Earthwoman's grandiose pitch, he starts to see the merits in it. If he becomes popular, he wouldn't have to seek out Gorak. Gorak would seek him out. Just as he asks Lois to continue with her pitch, they are interrupted by agents from the Pentagon who are here to confiscate Superman's gizmo for testing. You know, the usual super secret government stuff that also finds its way into Stan Lee's stories. SALDEN gets sassy with the Earthlings, telling him he expects his shoulder harness dry cleaned without starch when they return it, but they snap at him and go about government business. An agent tries to put on the harness and tries to fly, but crash lands right on his face, thinking that there might be some trick behind this thing, but has to end up leaving before he can figure it out, because Superman has the greatest defense in the world against super secret government operations. He has a lawyer. His lawyer threatens to sue the Pentagon for this, and that, and the other, and the agents leave whimpering as SALDEN incredulously thanks his legal savior. Lois Lane chimes in by telling him that she hired the guy for him, and that when you're with Lois Lane, your butt's always protected. She starts talking about a Larry King interview when SALDEN clocks an ongoing political crisis playing out in the very city they were in. Apparently, the Chinese president had been kidnapped, and the terrorists had demanded $10 billion in ransom within 12 hours. By this point, SALDEN has enough knowledge about Earth's political systems to figure out that this situation could escalate into an all-out war. And that would put his plans of going home to Krypton on an indefinite hold. He decides to take control of the situation and flies off to the Pentagon with a plan. SALDEN was going to single-handedly save the president's life. He disguises himself as part of the payload that the terrorists were supposed to receive, but is shocked to discover that the money wasn't picked up by a helicopter, it was swallowed by a literal hole in the earth, which led him to his old nemesis, Gorak. The evil Kryptonian had somehow managed to gather a band of terrorists and even kidnap Lois Lane. He reveals himself as a mastermind of the kidnapping of the Chinese president, and SALDEN rightfully wonders how he managed to pull this off so quickly after landing on Earth. But all his investigative questions are drowned in a sea of blind rage when Gorak opens his mouth next. After getting SALDEN tied up by his goons, he taunts the squadmen, claiming that he can finally finish what he started on Krypton. He had killed his wife, and he would now kill him. This flips a switch in SALDEN's minds, and he breaks free of his literal steel bonds to layeth the smacketh down upon Gorak's goons. He saves Lois Lane from certain death, and unwittingly becomes her star talent in the process, and then returns to face off against his enemy for one last time. The two Kryptonians battle in the subways of Los Angeles, but Gorak's overzealous nature proves to be his undoing. He fires off an RPG in close-quartered combat scenario and pays for it dearly when the entire subway system collapses in on him. SALDEN manages to leave unscathed, but his work remains unfinished. The 12-hour timeline is almost over, and he is nowhere close to finding the Chinese president yet. As Lois prattles off about getting the best military bid for him in case war breaks out, SALDEN realizes something. Earlier, down in the underbelly of Los Angeles, when he asked Gorak where the president was, he taunted him by saying, "Only time will tell." Now, up on the surface, Lois points out that there's a giant clock tower in Los Angeles where he can check the time. SALDEN, with his newly acquired telescopic vision, can see that the Chinese president has been strapped to one of the hands of the giant clock with a rather explosive package. He immediately leaps into action and saves the president, hurling the bomb safely up towards the atmosphere and allowing it to detonate. When he lands, the Chinese president absolves the US government of any involvement in the plot to kidnap him, and Lois Lane lets him know that her client, Superman, is available for overseas booking as well. And thus, the S symbol that adorns SALDEN's shoulder harness and was the logo of the squad that he would have gladly given his life for, takes on a new life of its own on the planet Earth. Though Lois Lane and Clark Kent spend most of their time together discussing business deals, SALDEN knows that the S will now stand for some form of hope for the people of Earth. He takes some form of solace in that, but is still disturbed by the fact that Gorak was able to orchestrate such a plan in such a short order. He thinks to himself that a bigger factor must be at play as he crosses the Church of Eternal Empowerment. And we all know instantly that the day is not too far for Superman to take to the skies and save mankind from itself once again. How is Stan Lee's Superman different from DC's Superman? If you couldn't tell by the story we've narrated so far, the Superman that DC readers loved and cherished as a pure hero since 1938 and the Superman that Stan Lee created in his 2001-2002 miniseries are two entirely different people. Yes, they're Kryptonians, but even the way their planet has been represented is completely different. For starters, Kryptonians do not have crazy superpowers like icy breath or laser beam eyes or the ability to hear heartbeat of a person that is literally halfway across the world. They are just regular humanoids existing on the planet Krypton in a galaxy far removed from the Milky Way. On Stan Lee's Krypton, science is cherished as much as it is in the DC's Krypton, but unlike the latter, it forms the basis for their development as a civilization. Take, for instance, the fact that on Krypton, people travel using shoulder harnesses. It's like something out of Back to the Future, right? And we still don't have our hoverboards. But what makes Lee's version of Superman so compelling to us is the fact that his story doesn't begin as an infant in Kansas. It begins as an adult squadman on Krypton, and therein lies the biggest difference between Stan Lee's Superman and the Superman that Jerry Siegel created. The fact that SALDEN is a fully grown man whose actual intentions are much more personal and borderline selfish than Kal-El's is what makes him such a layered character. He gives Superman's idealism a practical voice, where Kal-El might have innocently revealed his alien nature to the first humans he encountered as an adult alien. SALDEN played it cool and tricked the humans into thinking he was one of them, and that his gizmo is what made him special. This effectively negates the possibility of a Lex Luthor type figure in Lee's Just Imagine universe. But who knows whether old Lexi was even considered for an appearance by Stan the Man. What we do know is that his Superman isn't inherently altruistic. Yes, he was a police officer on his planet and has morals that cannot be violated no matter the cost, but like most cops, we feel, he isn't afraid to bend the rules, something mainstream Superman would usually not stand for. For instance, the only reason he even wants to help reduce crime on Earth is that he wants their space program to develop to the point where they can help him get back home, but when he returns home in a later issue of the miniseries, he finds himself disappointed, thinking that life as a hero on Earth was better than coming back to a planet that had nothing to offer to him anymore. And so we see Superman in a much more jaded light under Stan Lee's guidance, which we think is a refreshing take on the Man of Steel, and one that also appropriately depicts his moniker in the sense of SALDEN being implacable as a glacier. DC Superman embodies everything heroic about a superhero, from his powers down to his conduct. He's supposed to be a goody two-shoes because he's the world's first superhero. Stan Lee's Superman acts heroically to make ends meet, and that, we think, makes for a much more interesting dynamic. Don't get us wrong, there's no comparison between the Superman we know and the Superman Stan created. They're fundamentally different from each other. We just wanted to give Stan his flowers for bringing out a side of the Son of Krypton that most other writers haven't been able to capture as effectively within less than 50 pages. Marvelous verdict. If you want to give a read to any of the 13 classic stories that Stan Lee penned for DC for the year that Just Imagine ran, make it this one. It's not just because of the fact that we get to see Stan Lee and John Buscema work their creative magic within the confines of DC. It's also the fact that they took a massive gamble on reimagining Superman as a kind of stoic, out-for-himself, grown-ass adult when he gets to Earth, and it paid off in spades. Superman is usually featured as the fulcrum of DC Comics, as the axis around which every major event in the company history rotates, from Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985 to Doomsday Clock as recently as 2019. Everything that happens in DC is inadvertently linked to Superman, except that one time, a Batman from the Dark Multiverse invaded the Prime reality. But Lee and Buscema's work is able to take him out of that role and turn him into this sort of war veteran who can't wait to get back home to pay his respects to the dead, but ends up living where he is because, damn it, he cannot deny that he's grown to love this place. Even if it is for all that artificial adulation that he receives, they've given Superman fallible qualities that don't spiral into outright tyranny, something that DC loves doing. And it makes for a rather interesting read through the rest of this series. Even though Superman isn't the linchpin of Stan Lee's Just Imagine universe, we'd argue that he is perhaps better represented here as a standalone character than his own story sometimes. We're willing to take that opinion to our graves. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.